Intervals. What is a diatonic interval? Luckily for us, diatonic just means we're playing within a scale or within a set amount of notes, which is how most modern music works. Specifically in modern American music, we typically have 8 notes in a scale and 12 tones within an octave. If that sounds confusing to you, keep watching. This video is for you. We're going to talk about musical intervals, or the space between two notes. And it might surprise you why it's important to know about intervals. Inside here, you will find interval examples with trumpet, guitar, and piano. So if you play any of those, then you might find this helpful. If we want to have space between notes, we have to have notes. Thus, we have the musical alphabet. The musical alphabet is simply A through G, and then it begins again. You can think of it as a circle which continues forever going up and down. Because these note names are all just plain note names, we just call these natural notes. So this is only the partial alphabet. The full musical alphabet includes something called accidentals. They are sharps and flats. Depending on which key you're playing in, you will either have sharps or flats or no sharps or flats. Accidentals help shape the different scales we play. I like to think of sharps, which shift a note up a half step, as if you were to sit on a nail. What would your body do if you sat on a nail? You would jump up. Just like a sharpened note. If someone slashed your car tire, your car would slump down to the ground because you have a flat tire. A flattened note is lowered a half step. If flats and sharps are confusing to you, it'll make more sense when you play in a key with flats or sharps. To keep things the same, the examples in this video will center around sharps. However, you should notice that the same notes are the same from flat to sharp. A sharp is equivalent to B flat, C sharp is equivalent to D flat, and things like that. We actually call those enharmonic, where we have two different notes the same note with two different names. When we have the full alphabet and we can go one letter to the very next, we call those half steps. I've also heard them called semitone or half tones, but they all mean the same thing. I call them half steps. They could move up or down. Those are all half steps. We call this A to A. Well, there should be an A there. There's an A here, all the way to the A. That is an octave, and you'll understand why a little later. But also, check out between B and C and between E and F. There's no accidental, there's no sharp or flat between them. Because of how our musical alphabet was constructed, there are no sharps or flats between those notes. When we play more than two half steps at a time, we call that playing chromatically. So chromatically just means going one note up or one note down. So this A sharp, B, C sharp, D, that could be considered the chromatic scale. Chromatic meaning many colors. That's what chrome really means. And so this is all the colors that we can have specifically in this octave. The chromatic note is literally every note going up or down the musical alphabet when you include the sharps and flats. Really, it has no beginning or end because you can start and end in the same place. They're all going up half steps. To better understand all the musical intervals available, we should understand the smallest parts of the interval, which are half steps and whole steps. Half steps are the notes that move chromatically. A to A sharp, A sharp to B, those are half steps. Because two halves make up a whole, two half steps also make up one whole step. Knowing half steps and whole steps are critical to knowing how to play scales because scales operate on a formula of half steps and whole steps. That formula is universal in all 12 keys. So for some it's easier to learn a scale based on the formula rather than reading it over and over and over on sheet music and memorizing it that way. So far, we know about the chromatic scale. And again, the chromatic scale formula is just to move up or down by half steps. The musical theories, or what we could consider musical theory, is exactly what the name implies. They're just theories. This is what a bunch of people thought made the most sense in how music conjures feelings. Today's American music is rooted in old white European men and how they played their music. Bach, Beethoven, and people before them, even. Later on, American slaves would take that system in oral tradition of hymns and spirituals, and those gave rise to gospel and blues and jazz. Blues and jazz evolved into rock. In fact, I consider rock a jazz genre. We'd call them rock charts. So this is where the spacing of our notes in the musical alphabet come from. All notes are based on their frequency, or how fast whatever makes the note is vibrating per second. Bach, in my opinion, is a big reason why we have this system. His work entitled The Well-Tempered Clavier was based on the note system we have today. Before that, there were different ways to arrange notes. Now we have something called standard tuning, and that's how we make sure that everything is in the same tune, or every note is supposed to be in the same tuning. And our standard of tuning right now is A440. That means the specific note A4 sounds at 440 beats per second, and we tune by half steps up or down to fill out the instrument. In Beethoven and before in Bach's time, they tuned everything a little lower. It was closer to 415 or 432. Due to our technology, it's easier to have standards across the board for most instruments because we have specific note spacing and we have certain intervals that we consider perfect. In Beethoven and before in Bach time, they tuned a little lower, closer to A415 or A432. Due to our technology, it's easier to have standards across the boards for most instruments. Because of our specific note spacing, we have certain intervals that we consider perfect, because the frequencies complement one another very well and have kind of like a flat affect. Imperfect intervals, specifically the minor second, are discordant and they clash together because the frequencies bump into one another. We want that because it adds tension to our music, which is really what music is all about, giving musical tension and releasing it. One perfect interval, if you consider it an interval, is a note in unison. If you have two trumpets playing the same A, they are playing in unison. For all these examples of intervals, we assume that two instruments are playing, if there are two instruments playing, they're playing perfectly in tune. The next perfect interval is the perfect fourth. A perfect fourth is made up of 5 half steps or 2 whole steps and an additional half step. The funny thing about counting intervals is we count from the beginning note to the end note. So from A to A sharp and then B and so on, we get 5 half steps. From A to A sharp is 1, A sharp to B is 2, B to C is 3, C sharp is 4, C sharp to D is 5. It would be easy to think that an interval of 4 should be 4 notes in between the first and last note, but this will make more sense when we put together intervals for scales. One way you can help yourself learn intervals is to be somewhat familiar with how they sound. If you have trouble knowing immediately how to recall them by name, you can think of a tune that you can remember it by. The opening to Here Comes the Bride is a good example of the perfect fourth. Perfect fifths are notes separated by 7 half steps, or 3 whole steps and 1 half step. A couple of examples of perfect fifths are the 2 first twinkle twinkles in the song, or the first 2 notes in the main theme to Star Wars. last perfect interval we'll talk about is the perfect octave. An easy way to remember the octave is that it's just going to be that same letter, but one that comes next, either up or down. There are more perfect intervals, but they're just extensions of the intervals we already have. For instance, you could have a perfect octave and then add a perfect fourth for a perfect 12th. We consider those compound intervals since the alphabet has started over from where you had already started. If you remember E.T., the first two notes in the theme is an octave. If you know what the prefix oct stands for, you can deduce that an octave has 8 tones, and you're right. But there are more than 8 tones in an alphabet between A and A. An octave is based on the diatonic scale. In a scale, there are 8 notes from the first A to the last A, and that makes the octave. We'll talk about scales extensively later on. Now we come to the interesting intervals. Let's talk about the tritone first. The tritone is made up of 3 whole steps or 6 half steps. Between the 2 octave notes, the note in the middle is the median of the alphabet. It's right in the middle. Because the octave is divided by 3 notes, we call this a tritone. In ancient music, the tritone was forbidden and considered evil. Maybe that's why it's so prevalent in modern death metal music. It's very dissonant. It's also the opening part to the Simpsons theme. And what's left are major and minor intervals. We label major intervals with an uppercase M and minor intervals with a lowercase m. A major second is composed of 1 half step. The popular sound made from the minor second is the theme from Jaws. The major second is made up of 2 half steps, or 1 whole step. The first 2 different notes in My Country 'Tis of Thee is a major second. When we see a major or minor second ascend or descend in musical notation, ascending, descending, you will notice that they generally follow a line, space, line, space, line pattern. We call these stepping notes because they go up or down the alphabet in a stepping motion. Using this morphology of where the note goes, as well as the skips that you'll see in the next slide, is a great way to read music a little quicker. Concentrate on where the note moves instead of figuring out which note it is, finding out where it is, and then playing it. Minor thirds are made up of 3 half steps or a whole step plus a half step. Brahms' Lullaby is a popular example of the minor third. major third is made up of 4 half steps or 2 whole steps. Notice how the alternating thirds in the example above shows the notes skipping from line to line and space to space. Line to line and space to space. We call these skipping notes because they're skipping either the line or the space. Similar to previous stepping notes, it's an easy way to recognize these notes and how they move. After the fourth, tritone, and fifth, we have the minor sixth. Minor sixths are separated by 4 whole steps or 8 half steps. The main part of Scott Joplin's Entertainer is an example of a minor sixth. A major sixth is composed of 4 whole steps and 1 half step, or 9 half steps. I've always used My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean as an example of the major sixth. Finally, we have the sevenths. The minor seventh is comprised of 5 whole steps or 10 half steps. If you know West Side Story, you've probably heard the minor seventh in the song There's a Place for Us during the words there's and The major seventh is separated by 5 whole steps and a half step, or 11 individual half steps. It's the note just before the perfect octave. The words "a world" in World of Pure Imagination from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is a good example of the major seventh. Here are a couple of other notes about intervals. If you play 2 notes together, that's a harmonic interval. If you play 2 notes separately, one after another, we call that a melodic interval. What's the difference between melody and harmony, like melodic and harmonic? Melodic refers to the tune we hear the singer put words to make a song, or the melody. Everything else which supports that melody is the harmony, usually chords or parts of chords. Any interval greater than an octave is considered a compound interval, or basically we're adding an octave to whatever interval you want. For instance, a major ninth could be comprised of A, then you skip up to the next octave A, and play the next B. More specifically, we would have A4 skip to B5. It's similar to a major second, but because it's separated by a perfect octave, we consider it a major ninth. When we do that to more discordant notes, because one of them is a little higher, the frequencies are a little nicer, and you can have nice discordant. To better put some of these intervals into perspective, let's take a quick look at an example of the C major scale. The major scale is bright or happy. There is a formula of intervals which makes up every major scale and goes from the first note to the second note with a whole step, then another whole step, then a half step, followed by 3 more whole steps, finally a half step. This formula can be used to play all the major scales in all 12 keys because there's 12 tones in an octave, and you can start a scale on each one of them. Each scale requires more or less sharps or flats depending on where you start in the alphabet. In the next video, we'll explain scales in more detail. So why are we talking about intervals? Well, because we have the alphabet, we can move from one note to another. Depending on the space between those notes, or the interval, we can create scales. Inside scales, there are chords to be built. When we have a nice sequence of chords, we can repeat those chord progressions, which ends up being a song or a piece. Those are the fundamental building blocks of music. Personally, when I want to hear a song and play it by ear, I listen to how the notes move. Are they going up or down? Are they skipping or stepping? Or using other intervals that I can hear well? The more familiar you are with the way music moves note to note, the easier it will be for you to play something on an instrument just by hearing it. If you like this video, give it a like. If you find something overwhelmingly confusing or you have a different and maybe better way of explaining things, leave a comment. I'm always on the lookout for good educational tools to share. Be on the lookout for the next video in the series based on scales.